I'm Joe Carbonetta, and this is Arroyo Live. This program, which is produced by and through the facilities of Pasadena Media, was creators score the need for a more compassionate, more considerate approach to every aspect, every person in our society. And so it remains the continued focus of this program to try to help bring together and strengthen our community through informative and meaningful conversation. This program is live if you are watching on Tuesday, September 29th. And there will be an opportunity for you to call in with your questions or comments later on in the program. You can share them with us anytime at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. Technology is a huge part of the U.S. economy, playing a role in almost every other sector, from healthcare to transportation, education to energy. In fact, according to an annual analysis published by the Computing Technology Industry Association last year, the industry ranked one of the top 5 economic contributors in 23 states and among the top 10 in 28. This evening, we look at COVID's effects on the technology industry. With me are Beth Kuchar, president of Innovate Pasadena, and Spokeo co-founder and CEO, Harrison Tang, who is also an Innovate Pasadena board member. Thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Right. As is kind of our tradition here on the station now, we'd like to take a minute or two to ask each of you to tell our audience at home just a little bit more about yourselves. Beth, if it's all right, I'd like to begin with you.
Fingers crossed I wouldn't be first. So as you mentioned, I am currently president of Innovate Pasadena, and Innovate Pasadena is a nonprofit group that's been around since 2013, obviously based here in Pasadena, it's in the name, and our big mission is really to advance what we call Greater Pasadena, so sort of the San Gabriel Valley area, as a center for technology and design innovation by supporting collaboration between businesses, academia, and the community to attract and retain companies and investors and capital and entrepreneurs. And so really that's a whole lot of language to just say that we're trying to connect people and companies and capital. And that is not actually my day job, so that's my volunteer hat. I do have a day job as well. I have been running a digital product and design agency called Embroaden, which is based here in Pasadena, and we've been around since 2002. So I'm invested in the community, invested in making Pasadena a great center of technology.
Well, again, Beth, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I don't know how you found the time. It sounds like you wear so many hats. I'm wondering if you actually have any time to sleep in all of this. But Harrison, your turn now. And Beth, again, I apologize for putting you on the spot first. I didn't know that you were hoping to go last there.
Great. So thanks, Joe. I'm Harrison, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Spokeo. So Spokeo is a people search engine, people intelligence service that organizes about 14 billion records about people. And then we aggregate them into about 600 million profiles to help over 18 million users a month to search, connect with others, and know who they're dealing with. So people are using it to, whether it's to find long lost family members, or actually one of the famous bloggers once said, Spokeo before you date, making sure that the person you date is who they say they are, right? Or businesses using us to prevent fraud, verify customer identities, or law enforcement uses Spokeo to catch bad guys. Our mission is to make the world around us more transparent, really answering the question of who is this person? Who are we, especially in the digital world? So I've started this, this is actually my first and only job so far in my life. I started this right toward the tail end of my college career, and it's really a story of change. And I think that's the theme of the COVID too. It's about change and how does businesses and people manage this change, right? Because at the end of the day, change is scary, right? But it also means opportunity. So I think it is very exciting times, and how do we all work together to affect change for the better. That's a very interesting thing and very interesting problem for all of us, the society, to tackle together.
Well, Harrison, I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this evening as well. As was noted at the beginning, and I think you've both done a fine job of reinforcing that, clearly you are experts in the technology sector. And so the obvious first question of the evening, based on the show, is how has COVID affected the technology sector in the U.S. and perhaps even globally at this point?
Yeah, I personally think there has been a huge impact. Now, this particular impact is not purely negative or purely positive. I think it's just a shift. To put an example, I think this COVID definitely has impacted companies or businesses that require physical presence. Commercial real estate, you're not seeing the full impact right now because business like us, when we sign a lease, it's at least 3 to 5 years, bro. So you don't see the impact right away, but they have been impacted, and the impacts is expected to get even worse, right? But then other businesses such as communication, digital communication like Zoom, and those kind of services has benefited quite a bit. Another good example is deliveries, food deliveries. I think before COVID, even though some of them went public, all of us know they weren't making a cent since the inception of the business. They're basically using shareholders' money to subsidize their business. And nowadays, everyone's using it. So there has been quite a shift, quite a change. And overall, I think for the entire economy, I think the impact should be about neutral. But there has been quite a shift from certain businesses like airline industries, hospitality. They've been impacted like no other, right? If you go to LAX right now, literally no one's there. No one can recognize it again, right? But then other businesses, digital services, for example, digital signature, companies like DocuSign, they're taking off like crazy. I think their revenue grew like 2 times or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I need to double check the exact number. But you're seeing this kind of shift across different industries, and I think that's what COVID situation has affect all the businesses.
Well, and I think also to that point, it's also accelerated a lot of things that were already happening. There were a lot of technologies that were already under development that maybe hadn't caught on yet, or that were maybe on a slow and steady pace. We had zero trust security, we had telehealth, we had teleeducation, we had, some automated customer experience interactions and productivity tools, but that really accelerated the adoption and the development of a lot of those tools. And it also, Harrison, you mentioned like delivery apps and those types of businesses, and they were propping themselves up with investor funds when they weren't really making a true profit. And so it accelerated, either you're going to go bust or you're going to figure out how to innovate. So sometimes it lights that fire to innovation where you either need to make the change or you're not going to survive. But I think it's really pushed things forward into development.
Yeah, and I concur. When the COVID first happened in March, some people expect it's just a systematic shock. So basically, there's a big change and things will go back to normal. I can tell you, based on, for example, Spokeo's web behaviors and things like that, or earlier examples that Beth have shared, we're not going back to the old normal, right? Even when the COVID situation, the pandemic is over, the world will change. Basically forever. Things will maybe subside a little bit. Maybe people will go out more, right? Instead of staying at home and use internet and digital communication all the time. But that said, the new normal is going to be different from the old. That is for certain.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what is the saying? It takes, 30 days to create a habit. And that's not, scientifically based. There's no psychological study that says that's the magic number, but after a certain extended period of time, you do create new habits. And so with a lot of technology use and technology reliance, we're creating new habits and we're creating new reliance on certain aspects of life that rely on new technologies. So yeah, things are going to change and they're not going to go back.
Well, the U.S. is considered among the nations that lead in technology, but was our technology industry prepared for COVID?
I think prepare is the wrong word, because I think prepare implicates that the technology industry in general or our society was expecting that this kind of pandemic will happen. I don't think we prepare for a pandemic to happen, right? But rather, I think it just came kind of all of a sudden, right? I just remember when the president announced that this is a pandemic, and then the office needs to be closed. I remember like Spokeo has to basically get all the everyone off the office and change to remote like in a week, like basically 7 to 10 days time frame, So I think we definitely weren't expecting this COVID to happen. So I don't think we are prepared in that regard. But that said, I think there has been quite a bit of technical advances, Zoom, for example. But even before Zoom, there is like different Microsoft Teams, Google Hangout. I can name a bunch of them. Even Skype has this kind of video conferencing capabilities and things like that. Those technologies has advanced to a certain level where if these did not happen, I don't think companies like Spokeo, like us, can actually transition like almost 200 people from office to remote in 7 to 10 days. I don't think that would have happened, right? So I do think the technology is mature enough, and in some ways, in retrospect, COVID is that catalyst, the push to really accelerate this change. But I don't think any of us prepare for this moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also, I do think technology-based companies probably had a little bit of an advantage because we already rely heavily on tools like Slack and, productivity apps and time tracking apps and, employee onboarding websites. And so there's a lot more sort of offline communication. Our team for my company is a distributed team already, so our switch was pretty easy. We're already almost completely remote, so just going completely remote, not a big shift. And so a lot of technology companies that are distributed, they've already got some tools in place to make that work. And so I think there's academia especially trying to play catch up, but the technology tools existed to be adopted and to help everyone, switch over and deal. So the stage was set. It's just, I don't think things like Zoom and Slack and, some of these other apps would have been adopted so heavily by entertainment industry and, real estate and some of the industries that traditionally are a little bit behind the times on these things. I don't think they would have adopted as quickly without the pandemic to, again, be that accelerant.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Obviously, you were mentioning the video conferencing capabilities. Harrison, I think you brought up several companies that have been around to do video conferencing in one form or another for quite some time. Skype might be probably one of the earliest adopters of such technology. And primarily, I think it initially was seen more as a form of entertainment rather than a method of getting business done. But obviously the effects are far-reaching, and there have been many companies that have followed in their footsteps and perhaps improved upon the product. But the education industry seemed to be slow to adopt such technologies, and when they were quickly forced to try and figure out how to create a remote model, many of them seemed to be caught completely unprepared. What could have been done, what should have been done, and what is being done to make that more friendly going forward?
Well, so first of all, So first of all, like I think the different school districts have definitely moved to the remote learning kind of setup, right? They're forced to do that. And for example, I have a 6-year-old who just entered in the first grade, and the LA Unify is all remote, right? So actually this is interesting because the first day of school, I think all of us have a certain memory of the first day of school. And his first day of school is just so different because he's just talking to a screen, basically what we're doing right now. And in some ways, actually going off one little tangent, when our company leadership was debating about the future of work, I was saying that the world has changed, right? It's very similar to when we first hold the first iPhone. You know, whether you like smartphones or not, because that notification can drive you nuts. You know the world has changed. And the moment when I saw my son doing his first day of school over a computer, over a screen, I know the world has changed. That's the kind of the iPhone moment for me. And I think so. I think the education sector has already moved to remote. But how do we actually go a step further, right? And I think what we need to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of education in person? What is the purpose of an in-person education, right? Because if we are still not asking the why, we're just kind of following and react to what happened, then you really miss the point, because the world has moved on. If you want to be a leader, right, to this particular trend, you really need to ask the why. What is the purpose of an in-person education or in-person collaboration, right? And I think I personally have been thinking about this quite a bit. I think one thing, that we can all agree on is in-person collaboration communication is synchronous. It's not asynchronous. So asynchronous means it happens in different times. And asynchronous communication or education can just be on demand, essentially, right? So here's a book. You can read it anytime you want, right? But obviously, after you finish reading it, I'll do a check mark and making sure you finish it. But you can finish it at night or you finish in the morning. That's more asynchronous communication, asynchronous interaction. The in-person ones, or the one that we had to do it through Zoom, is called synchronous, right, interactions. And synchronous interactions, we really need to understand what's the value in that, So I'll just give an example, again, using my son. I think the school is basically fully remote, but for some reason, turning in homework has to be done in person. This is a reflection that we haven't really asked the why. we're just like kind of do it in between, right? It's like, okay, previously, so some of it still have to be in person so that, we kind of check the boxes, right? So the one that they pick to do it in person is turn in homework, okay? But then the other things are all remote and all that stuff. So I think to answer your question, how do we get better prepared? I think we need to dig into the why, figure out what's the purpose, right? So that we can find appropriate solutions to different problems.
And I think also to add on to that, the other part of the equation is that fully remote learning has really, really made the tech divide a stark, it's spotlighted it. So, you have a lot of kids who don't have access to high-speed internet, who don't have a laptop or a Chromebook or a tablet at home, or maybe there's one device for the entire household. Maybe you have families who are relying on going to the library for computer time, and we're all in the tech industry, so we're all used to having all of our connected devices all the time. You forget that there's a large, large portion of the U.S. who doesn't have access to, a computer and basic internet. So how do we reach those kids and not allow them to fall behind? Is it on the government? Is it a partnership between governments and technology companies? You know, do we rely on nonprofits to do fundraising? You know, earlier in the year, a local charter school reached out to Innovate Pasadena because they were working to try to forget even trying to pay for it, but just trying to find some Chromebooks for their students to be able to actually start online school. Otherwise, they were going to fall behind. And their student base was mostly homeless kids and foster kids who are at risk of dropping out of the school system completely. So, you know, as a nonprofit that kind of specializes in just connecting the dots, connecting resources, we were able to help them track down Chromebooks. We were able to help them reach out to the community and get donations of iPads and Chromebooks. And it's great the community in Pasadena responded, but, you know, we need a better solution than just these sort of one-off kind of, you know, grassroots responses. And I think online education is great. I think that it has the wonderful benefit of allowing people to learn at their own pace. So, you know, you have kids who might be, you know, needing a little more time to digest certain concepts and work through, you know, new lessons, and you have kids that could probably accelerate through it quickly. And so that gives them the opportunity. But we need to find the equalizer first.
Well, this brings up one perhaps philosophical question. I don't think that there is an argument that that remote-based learning can be equally effective in terms of the amount of information that is conveyed. Possibly it could even be more effective. But is there a concern about the loss of human interaction in that model?
Yeah, well, so I have read various studies, and I'm going to say I'm not an expert in this area, but, you know, I think we're on Zoom right now. We've all experienced Zoom fatigue, meaning that when we interact in person, there's other micro cues that we pick up on naturally. It's instinct, it's ingrained. We don't have to work hard at it, and we lose those cues when we're just on a flat screen face-to-face like this. And so it's easy for kids to get distracted, and they lose some of that in-person reliance on natural cues that would make absorption of some of the information a lot easier. So, you know, there is maybe the aspect of how do we make up for that, or maybe our future holds more of a mixture of online lessons that are available long-term, and then, you know, still some in-person, teaching and education as another component.
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be a loss of in-person social skills. I mean, just for example, I myself, I only saw my co-founder in real person twice over the last 7 months, right? And when I saw him, it just feels a little bit awkward, right? Because we see each other over on the computer screen all the time. And suddenly a real life person just standing in front of me. Even I myself felt a little bit awkward. So I think if the question is, will there be a loss in that kind of skill, in-person social skills? I think the answer is definitely yes. Now, my question, and this is an interesting question, is how important and how frequent will those in-person social skills is required in the future, right? If the schools are all done remotely, right? If the work are all done remotely, I think the interaction basically changed, and we all have to learn new skills. For example, I've done public speaking from time to time, right? With 50, 100 people, sometimes hundreds. And I can tell you that skill is very different from just doing an interview over a computer, talking to yourself, you know. And that's a new skill I have to learn. Doing a TV interview versus being a YouTuber is also very, very different too, right? So I think it's just a change in the way people interact, and it requires adjustments. It requires new skills to be learned. But if you're talking about in the area of in-person social skills, will there be a loss in that for the kids and for ourselves? I mean, the answer is definitely yes.
So I'm curious, do you know anyone, any parents, friends who homeschool? Because I wonder if that could hold some answers. Growing up, I knew other kids who got homeschooled and they weren't awkward. They had great social skills. They were very polite. So there must have been something extra that was going on there to make sure that they weren't awkward and standoffish when they were around kids their own age.
Well, if I can speak to that for just a moment, I would say, or I would offer this explanation for that. You did mention that there must be some other factor. I would say that that factor would probably be their parents, who may not have already had the homeschooling and may themselves have had very good social skills, which they could pass on to their children. But as generations go by, where people get used to the distance or remote learning models and the remote work models, and there are fewer and fewer people who develop those social skills, will it be a continuous cycle where we see a continual degradation of those skills in our society? Beth, there was another topic that you brought up, or another point that you brought up just a moment ago, and I'd like to explore that for a moment. But before we do that, I would like to remind our viewers at home that if you're watching on Tuesday, September the 29th, we are live. And if you'd like to call us with your questions or comments, you may do so at area code 951-356-6882. Beth, a moment ago, in one of your responses, you talked about how there are a group, a percentage in our society that don't have access to the technology. And I'm wondering, and again, I'd like to pose this question to both of you, if there are inroads being made within the industry, if there are plans or procedures that are taking place to make that technology available to people in our society who might otherwise be going unserved or underserved.
So I do know of, small programs and small groups here and there on at least a local basis. There's a great nonprofit group called STEAM Coders based here in Pasadena. Raymond E. Lee is the executive director, and they've been around for quite a while, and their goal is actually to provide opportunities to learn about STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, art, and math, to underserved, underprivileged kids in the Pasadena area. So he, has been working for some time with local companies to reach out and get devices to kids, to put together programs in robotics and hands-on introductions for kids that don't even know certain career opportunities exist. And, I think the big challenge for programs like that is really reaching the parents of the kids. So the kids are interested and they love to learn, but the parents don't always know that any of these programs exist or any of these career choices exist for their kids. Raymond, if you talk to him, he'll share that a lot of times, like some of the parents that do end up having their kids participate in his program, they will, pre-COVID, they would host a tour at JPL. STEAM Coders would, and bring some of the kids through JPL and Google and Facebook, and the parents didn't know where JPL was. They didn't know anything about, they'd go to Caltech. They didn't know anything about Caltech. They didn't know anything about Facebook being located here or what was really done there. And so it was a matter of actually connecting with the parents too and having to educate them as well and then help them get the resources. So it's a big, big challenge. I don't know really, we're talking a hard solution there.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I know a lot of schools actually standard issue Chromebooks, right? And then in the Chromebook, they will have different resources, whether it's ebooks, right, or different math lessons and things like that. So I know a lot of schools already do that. Now, I think the challenge a lot of times lies with the internet connections, right? Mm-hmm. And this is not just for the education, but even for business as well. Like, for example, actually our company has been discussing basically buying company accounts, that basically subsidize everyone's internet connections at home and making sure that there's a certain service level. Even then, there's no solutions out there that enables company who want to do this, right, for their teammates. There's no solution. Basically, everyone is on their own. And ultimately, our company decided to just pay $50 subsidy, that kind of thing, $50 a month. But then you still have to get internet connection your own because there's no such a thing, right? So same thing with the educational market is that different homes have different internet connections. A lot of times I see kids, right, because I sit next to my son when he's studying at home. A lot of times I see some kids have internet connection issues, or there are multiple people at home, right, working or studying, and they have internet connection issues. They drop off or they cannot hear what the teachers say. So I think the internet problem, how do we actually ensure that everyone has not just have access to broadband, but have reliable access to broadband? I think that's some problem that we still need to solve.
And a lot of that too starts at the city level. So just as an example, I have a friend and he was talking about how he recently was able to get, I guess, AT&T fiber. And so he has 1 gig for, a ridiculously low sounding dollar amount a month. And I looked into it. Well, that's not available here in Pasadena. And so it's kind of a matter of engaging with city officials. And I know that the city of Pasadena, the city's CIO, Philip LeClaire, has been working hard to actually make sure that the city has better access to high-speed connections. And I know that they have programs in the works to make sure that broadband is available throughout the city and that we're not left in the dust. I've also seen, some cities that have worked with local tech companies and purchased, out-of-use school buses and put Wi-Fi hotspots in them and driven around to neighborhoods that don't have great access and made free Wi-Fi available to kids in the area so that they can do their online learning. So I think it's a matter of engaging with the government, finding out what's in the works, and trying to get, again, that collaboration between some of the businesses that have, interesting and innovative ideas and the city that has some of the access and some of the know-how to help implement it.
All right. Harrison, you brought up a very interesting point just a moment ago, too, when you mentioned the need for Chromebooks or other netbook-type computers with this distance learning educational model. That must have presented a challenge in and of itself. There are an awful lot of school-aged children across the country, and every one of them needed to have a computer. And in most cases, the school system took on the task of trying to issue a computer for every student. That must have given rise to a massive manufacturing challenge. How did the technology sector overcome that problem?
I'm not familiar with the hardware industry, but I think, the industry in general, Chromebooks are still pretty inexpensive, right? And they're still all available, right, on the shelf. So I think the industry probably has done a good job, really meeting the demand of the market, because I'm pretty sure that different school districts or different sectors in our society suddenly sees this surge of the need for Chromebooks, right, netbooks, actually even desks. I'll just tell you a little funny story. Recently, I have to literally run to IKEA just to buy desks because all the desks are available. Everyone's buying desks for their home office setup. So, so I'm pretty sure there is there's a surge in need. But at the same time, I think the industry has done a relatively good job keeping those things in stock.
They didn't actually at the beginning of the pandemic. In fact, I had just personally for our office, we had placed an order to replace several laptops, and a lot of them had to be actually ordered and shipped in from China because the warehouse in the U.S. didn't have any stock available for the specs that we had placed an order for. So we waited like a month and a half to get some of our company laptops shipped. And at around the same time, this was in like January, February of this year, you know, a few months later, we have the lockdown and a lot of schools are trying to secure Chromebooks. It wasn't even a matter of lack of funds. Like they were going to throw the money at buying the Chromebooks, but you couldn't find like 500 Chromebooks to purchase. It was a scramble to locate some of the devices just because everybody needed it all at once. So, you know, and I don't think that supplies have necessarily been ramped up since then. It's just that there was a slowdown in production because China was already experiencing a slowdown in production due to COVID. And then that sort of, you know, cascaded into the U.S. demand in March, April, when these schools were trying to secure devices. So, you know, through Innovate Pasadena, we were sending shout outs to people. If you have a Chromebook you don't use, can you donate it? You know, we'll help. You know, we'll wipe it, you know, wipe your data off of a laptop that you don't use if you want to donate it. Same thing with tablets, because it wasn't even a matter of money for some of the schools. It was a matter of not being able to get a hold of the devices. Everyone was in competition trying to secure the resources. And so I think, you know, if there would have been a little more of an open, you know, accessible way to see inventory and supply, that would have been fantastic. Again, maybe that's a problem for, you know, tech industry to solve in the future. And we could feel like this is a one-time thing, but, you know, supply chain issues happen. And, you know, I think refrigerators are difficult to buy right now because everyone is buying an extra fridge to stock up on food. So there's some of these unforeseen consequences that, you know, it's hard to prepare for, but I think technology could help solve the issue in some, you know, to some extent.
Okay. Well, as we noted earlier on, the technology sector really affects most of the other industries in our nation as well as worldwide in some form or another. And owing to our roots here on this program discussing the COVID pandemic, we would be remiss if we didn't touch on the medical community. How has technology made inroads into medicine these days?
Well, I think, you know, just sort of as a generalization, there's been a lot more acceptance and adoption of telehealth is a big one. And, you know, we know Kaiser Medical School recently opened in Pasadena, and I do believe they're offering teleeducation. But, you know, I think that places like, you know, local hospitals, local medical facilities, they've been trying to accelerate adoption and trust with telemedicine. And I think this has definitely been the catalyst to get that going. And I think, you know, there's a lot more interest and adoption and use of and endorsement of wearables now. So, you know, you don't have to go in somewhere. You have wearable devices that you can rely on, you know, and I think people are starting to trust some of this technology a little bit more to some extent as well.
Yeah, I think that previously people just go to like their doctors, right? And then just for even very small things. And those visits, a lot of times, it's not really required. You can do it through the telemedicine and things like that. But because people have this trust issue toward the technology, or because maybe perhaps it's because health is such a sensitive topic, like people want to have that in-person interactions, telemedicine really didn't take off until COVID happened, you know, and I think in some ways that's a positive change, right? It's actually because those kind of interactions can really do it through online interactions, and it really can save a lot of cost, right? And make it the process a lot more efficient. So in some ways, this big change actually accelerated this movement, and that's a positive thing. But also in general, I think the medical industry has been leveraging big data technologies to really understand and develop drugs as well. And I think those things will continue and only accelerate, right, after this pandemic.
Yeah, and I think even things like AI, for chatbots. I know that there was a group of Caltech students that were using AI to try to create better COVID-19 prediction models, and they were working with local healthcare facilities. And, I know that there's a lot more interest now in response when people even use things like symptom trackers, which do use AI chatbots. And another big one that I forgot to mention is 3D printing. So 3D printing to handle PPE shortages. Again, just speaking locally, there was a group of art center students that worked on a project to help design and create 3D printed PPE for Huntington Hospital and some other local medical facilities. And there's also an Alhambra-based 3D industrial printer manufacturer called Make It 3D, and they designed a compliant face shield and some other PPE devices that they were 3D printing for any hospital that was in need. So I think there's a lot more leveraging 3D printing to actually produce supplies that normally that's not where hospitals would be turning.
Well, interestingly enough, you've brought AI into the discussion. For our viewers at home, AI stands for artificial intelligence, and that, of course, is an area under a lot of development in the technology sectors. There are and have been for some time concerns about AI and how sophisticated it becomes, and when it becomes sophisticated enough, whether or not it can still be controlled. Most recently, there have been discussions about the use of facial recognition software and the ways that it may or may not be used by government and other entities. And so there are privacy concerns as well. To underscore this point, I was about perhaps a year or so, maybe two. I'm a little rusty on the chronology, but Facebook began experimenting with the chatbots that you were just mentioning, Beth. And in one experiment, they actually had two computers networked together and had them start communicating with each other. And within a very short period of time, the AI began to create a language all of its own, which both of the computers understood, but people monitoring the experiment quickly realized they could not. I'm wondering if either of you have any thoughts on the concerns that the general public seems to have about AI and whether they should be distrustful of the technology as it develops.
Well, so I know that there's a local company here that is working on and rolling out a facial recognition app that allows you to pay with your face. So, totally touchless payments, and they also have, I think, a part of their business where you can gain access to buildings and it's touchless. So it's just, instead of any kind of ID, or key, it's your face. And you can also get screens like temperature screening to, make sure that you're safe to enter, let's say, an office building or a university campus. So there's great, beneficial to society applications for AI and for some of this other technology. There's another company based in Pasadena that uses AI and robotics to create a little robot that works with children with autism to help, teach them certain skills, to help interact, just with mental wellness. So there's definitely good applications. I think it comes back to, entrepreneurs and technologists having a moral obligation to kind of not allow us to yield to that technology necessarily, but to be careful and be watchful over the applications. And I think we can, without, naming specifics, there's a lot of instances throughout history where an invention has been created or something has been discovered, and it, of course, has unintended consequences and has been put to use for bad and harmed people. And, there's unintended consequences to all sorts of new technologies. It's just on us to be gatekeepers, I think. Us meaning society and the people who help create it and the people who apply it.
Okay.
Yeah.
you did. I was wondering if very quickly you had a response to that as well, because we actually have a caller who's waiting, and I'd like to get to them next. But I did want to get your response to this too.
Yeah, so first of all, I definitely don't think AI is scary, and I don't think is mysterious or anything like that, but I can totally understand why the general public think it can be scary because, first of all, the general public doesn't know how AI works. And second of all, they don't know how it's being used, right? There's complete lack of transparency from the tech industry in regards to how AI works and what it's used for, right? In fact, when I'm talking to different vendors, AI is becoming such a term that people will say, hey, my software is better because I have AI. Like that happens all the time, okay? They don't talk about how it works. They just say, hey, I'm better because I use this AI. It's such a hype term. And I'm really, to be very frank, even I myself is a little bit tired of it. But if you really understand how it works, it's not that mysterious. There's two types of AIs, right? There's something called supervised learning. Really, AI, if you go to Wikipedia, is a sub-subject under advanced statistics. So it's just a kind of advanced statistics. So if we stop using the word AI and call it advanced statistics, I don't think people are going to be that scared, right? Obviously, people are still going to be a little bit challenged that, hey, statistics, oh man, I need to go back to school, right, to brush that up. But it's definitely not as scary as some, the term AI, right? But that is really what it is, right? There's two types. There's called supervised learning, which is basically complicated regression models. Basically, that's what it is. And the second type is called unsupervised learning, which is a way to cluster information and identify patterns, right? And obviously, there's more sophisticated like deep learning and things like that. But ultimately, the point I'm trying to make is if you know how it works, right? If we can actually, the technologists can actually come up with a way that your grandma, even grandmas understand how it works. And if you know how it's being used, right? For example, a facial recognition software being used to pay the bill, totally fine. But if it's used to survey every single citizen, I think some people might say a thing or two about that, right? So it's actually not about technology. It's about how it's being used. That's the most important. And if you have the control over that, are you going to be scared? Definitely not. A car that just run randomly on the street, you're definitely going to be scared because you might get hit. But if you're on the driver's seat, you're not scared. No one's scared about that, right? So I think ultimately it's about transparency and it's about control.
All right. Well, we've had a caller on hold for some time. Damien, thank you so much for being so patient. The floor is yours if you would like to share your comments or questions.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. Harrison, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you in theory about if people have a greater understanding of what artificial intelligence is, then that's going to quell their fear. You don't fear what you understand. But I'm thinking that argument only works in a world where there is benevolent action and everything works according to plan. Right? People can talk about the advances of credit cards over the years and Apple Pay and online paying, things of that nature. But then the other side of the coin is identity fraud. So how do you address people's fears, not in a fear of understanding, but in a fear of this is just another way that I could potentially be taken advantage of? I also don't understand it, but my big fear is that my identity is going to be stolen, something bad is going to happen to me, something that I can't rebound from this thing that I have no understanding about and I have no control over.
So yeah, this is a very good question, but one of the things I want to clarify is what I was saying is not theory. It's not in theory, okay? It is actually something that Spokeo is actually working towards. It's a vision that can happen, okay? Control over your identity is something that can happen. Now, when we talk about control over identity, right? Or enabling the transparency and control over your identity. Since we're a data company, we really need to dig deeper into what identity is, right? What is identity, okay? And I have the luxury to think about this problem for a decade, so please allow me to share my definition. So the definition of identity, right, is basically information about someone that can be accessed and used, right, with permissions, okay? That's basically what that identity, the definition of identity is, okay? So information about people, right, that can be accessed, because if it's not being accessed, it's just a bits and bytes in a database that no one give a damn about, to be very frank, right? And people can actually control as well, right? So if that's the definition of the identity, right, how do we ensure control? Because yes, it is actually quite interesting. Control over a digital knowledge is not the same as control over a car. For example, if I sold you my car, you own my car, or I can take it back or whatever. But once you know I'm 38, you always know I'm 38. I can't take away from it. So when people are talking about, oh, my identity is my property, technically that's a wrong statement, okay? Because knowledge and property are two different concepts, right? Once you know I'm 38, once you know I have 3 kids, one is 2, 4, and 6, you forever knows about it, okay? There's no way I can get that out of your brain. So how do you leverage control? How do you enable control? Then we need to talk about the second part of the definition, which is about access. Because information without access, it's just bits and bytes that no one cares. So what you can control is controlling the access of that information, right? And in technical terms, it's called data lineage, right? And access control. So basically you can see you have a trace, and in some ways, using blockchain terminology, is basically you have some kind of ledger to knowing who has access to your information, so that if something happens, right? For example, someone uses it for nefarious reasons, you can trace back and see who is that person, who is responsible from the legal point of view for that nefarious use, right? So I think that's basically the control. So everything, and by the way, I can go on for hours. I'm not sure if the show has enough time for me to go on for hours on this, but ultimately everything I said is not theory. It's a reality waiting to happen.
Well, Damien, we'd like to, again, thank you for your call this evening. We certainly hope that answers your question. It seems that we actually have quite a bit of activity from our viewers this evening. We have a question coming to us via the chat this evening. This comes from Kevin, and he's wondering about smart city technology and where we are with that.
So as far as in the city of Pasadena, I can't necessarily speak to that. However, I do know that, our city is working really hard and does have programs in place where, we are, in fact, I think we've gotten awards for the past several years in the top, 5 digital cities in the U.S. So Pasadena absolutely does want to be a connected digital city. And, when you talk about digital cities, thinking about IoT, sensors, again, going back to data, which Harrison was talking about. So it's that slightly scary topic, but data being used for quality of life improvements for all of the citizens within a certain space. So that's definitely, for our city, something that's being worked towards, and I think has great potential, and possibly, again, one of those technologies being accelerated by the pandemic and by some of the changes that we've been seeing with the way that we live and work.
Okay. We are coming to the very closing minutes of the program, but I did want to pose this question, and hopefully both of you will give us your insights on this. Would you characterize the technology industry as being more proactive or reactive in the current scenario?
So I personally, I personally think the technology industry in general has been more proactive because I think the tech companies in general is very used to change, right? Like I'll just give an example. In 2006, when I first started Spokeo, a technology called Ruby on Rails was all the cutting edge. I remember when we first used it, it was not even version 1. It's like version 0.8 or something. And nowadays, it's not as active. It's not a growing community, right? So within a decade, technology changed all the time. You know, back in the day, our first server lives in the freaking bathroom, you know, because it was too loud, right? So I have to put it in the bathroom. And then later it went to co-location data centers. And then now everything's in the cloud, right? We have to actually deprecate all the old servers that we have, literally throw it in the trash because no one wants it. Everything is in the cloud. So change happens very, very fast in technology industries. And I think this kind of change that we're talking about caused by pandemic, I think technology industry has in some ways leading the charge, right? And more proactive, such as most recently, not just Twitter and Facebook, but a company called Quora. I happen to agree with that Quora CEO stance on the future of work, right? So the technology industry has been really thinking about taking a proactive stance on thinking about what the future of work will look like, you know, and what is the future of the world will look like post-pandemic.
Beth, your thoughts on this as well?
I agree with Harrison. I mean, and I think proactive maybe is the wrong word because, you know, we had ways to interact with each other online and keep on working from home and, you know, get groceries to our door and all of these great things, not because of the pandemic, but because these technologies were already developed and because there's a lot of technologies that were already under development. And so I think sometimes what's happening in the world, it will serve as an aha moment to those creators and innovators who are making the technology. So they have an idea, they're building something, but they aren't quite sure of the application yet. And so it can serve as, you know, here's the catalyst, here's what we're going to use it for. But, you know, things are always being developed. We feel like we watch sci-fi and then we have something created because we watch sci-fi. But a lot of times it was already under development before someone wrote that in a book or put it in a movie. You know, it's a very active, you know, there's a lot happening behind the scenes that we don't realize because it takes a long time for that device to get into our hands, for that app to be on our phone, for that, you know, widget to be accessible online.
Well, all right. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have actually run out of time and come to the close. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and this is Arroyo Live. This program, which is produced by and through the facilities of Pasadena Media. So much for joining us this evening. It's been truly delightful speaking with you, and we've learned a lot this evening. To our viewers at home, if there are topics you would like to see addressed in our discussions, you can email them to us at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Until then, this has been Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have one moment? Can we remind people, Innovate Pasadena is hosting our annual Connect Week Innovation celebration this year from October 18th through the 24th. So check out innovatepasadena.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.